Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage CEO of Atlas Network, Brad Lipps.
Friends of Atlas Network, I have waited for this moment. Can you feel the buzz of energy that's in the room as we kick off Liberty Forum 2021 in person? This energy in the air is what we get when we bring together friends of freedom from all around the globe. It's what happens at Atlas Network's Liberty Forum. This is an incredibly diverse community that you're a part of, and we can have lively disagreements about how to bring our principles into practice, but our discussions are always anchored on some common denominator beliefs about the dignity of the individual, who should enjoy equal justice under the rule of law with limits on government that allow free people to innovate and thrive within open markets and strong civil societies marked by genuine pluralism. These principles, our optimistic vision of authentic liberalism, is needed at this moment in history. I wrote a book this year about whether the sun is rising or setting on the free society. I make the case that in 2021, it's pretty well established that we're living through a global health crisis. It needs to be better appreciated that we're also in the midst of a global freedom crisis. Many people expect that we're going to be living in a new normal that will have us less free than we were back in those innocent days of November 2019 when we last were in person for Liberty Forum. But this is not preordained. Our community is going to have something to say about whether the decade ahead sees freedom falter or whether it sees freedom flourish. Atlas Network is now 40 years old, and once upon a time, I thought that we'd spend a lot of this year talking about our proud past. But that didn't work out the way I expected. There's just too much happening right now. Our focus has to be on the future. We have to be working hard in the present. We all know that this is a long-term effort to educate people, popularize people about the ideas of freedom, to show that market liberal reforms work in practice for everyone, but we need a sense of urgency now. There's a lot that feels like it's going in the wrong direction, and we need to take this to heart. I also would suggest that we cannot be discouraged by it. Do you know what Lord Ralph Harris, as General Director of the IEA, said a few months before Margaret Thatcher was elected in 1979. He wrote an article with this title, "Cheer up, things are getting worse." Ralph knew that sometimes people have to notice things getting worse before they're willing to take the necessary steps to make things better. So we can cheer up, because as things have indeed gotten worse during the COVID era, more people than ever before are wondering why our political elites are so incompetent and why we've entrusted them with so much power. They're wondering why our politics is so tribal, and they're increasingly suspicious about the empty promises of big government. I think that it's fair to say that there are more people than ever before who can be persuaded that the path forward should be markedly different than the path that has brought us here. So, let's carve out a new path forward. This is the theme of our conference, and it's what we need your mind to be focused on over these next 2 days. My big hypothesis that you can read about in the book is that there is an opening right now. As the illiberal left and the illiberal right use the powers of government to reward allies and to punish adversaries, they lose touch with normal people. And they've left a common sense middle behind as they push further out to their extremes headed nowhere good. We have a chance to prove that the path forward transcends partisan categories and is directed toward a vision of the free society that's based on dignity, compassion, and ideas that work. Now, to make our case effectively, I have 2 suggestions. As always, we need to be sticking to our principles, especially as relates to what I see as the intellectual debate of our time between the equality of outcomes crowd and our message about equality of opportunity. I think that to most people, equality of opportunity is self-evidently more just, more fair, more harmonious with our feelings about the dignity of the individual, and more achievable in society. So let's champion this important principle loudly in every context that we can. My second suggestion relates to the importance of overcoming malicious stereotypes about those of us who love free enterprise and the ideas of limited government. It's tempting to ignore stereotypes that are baseless, but I'm afraid they're going to persist until we proactively change them. So let's emphasize our message of inclusivity. Rather than "don't tread on me," I'd like us to adopt Students for Liberty's message of "don't tread on anyone." So inclusivity and equality of opportunity are my top two priorities when I think about how our movement should continue to evolve, so that when we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Atlas Network in the year 2031, and I expect you all to come back for it, we're then going to be living in a freer world where everyone has a chance to thrive in a climate of peace and prosperity. Those are my humble suggestions. But the great thing about Liberty Forum is that the smartest ideas are usually dispersed in the room, not always up on stage. So I hope that you're ready to be an active participant these next 2 days. Please make newcomers feel at home. Visit the booths of our sponsors. Thank those who've donated to make this wonderful meeting possible. This year, I'm also going to ask you to be mindful that there are a lot of people who need to take COVID tests on their way home, or they're stuck here for Christmas. So while I've got the green button that means I'm looking forward to some big hugs from old friends, please respect the yellow and the red buttons as well. Give folks some space. I think we've been real clear in all of our pre-conference communication about the responsibilities of each of us as attendees and the code of conduct that we're requiring in order to keep our meetings safe at the same time that we make it a fun place to work through some big ideas together. So let's get to our Cornerstone Talks. These are always short but powerful talks that get some big ideas on the table here at the outset of Liberty Forum. This year we've asked friends from Asia, Africa, North America, Latin America, and Europe to talk about their vision for our future and how we get there from here. After we hear their talks, we're going to have 20, 30 minutes left for Q&A. You can participate in that by going to the app you've downloaded. When you find on the schedule the Cornerstone Talks session, and then scroll down to where you see the live Q&A, please type in your questions. I'll do my best to work them into the conversation. But let's get to our first presentation. We're going to hear from Simon Lee, the co-founder of the Lion Rock Institute in Hong Kong, who is the managing director of an independent consultancy and the publisher of Red Flag Review. Welcome, Simon Lee.
Good morning. Today I'm going to share with you a story about a young boy. 60 years ago, someone gave a piece of chocolate to a 12-year-old boy in China. At that time, the boy often went without food for days, so that little piece of chocolate was perhaps the best thing that happened to him for a long time. And he told himself he must visit Hong Kong because that's where that chocolate came from, so it was so marvelous. And that little boy decided that he smuggled himself to Hong Kong. He was 12 years old. And on the night he arrived Hong Kong, he went to a factory and started to work in the garment factory. And this young, brave little boy is Jimmy Lai, my friend, my hero, and my mentor. In 1989, when Tiananmen Square massacre happened, Jimmy was already a very successful businessman. He had a huge fashion chain in China. But he was so worried about the future of Hong Kong and China. So he decided to use his business acumen to defend freedom. He started his first business venture, the Next magazine. In his magazine column, he called the Chinese Premier Li Peng a scumbag. He just wrote that. Li Peng is a scumbag. And the Chinese Communist Party, of course, was not happy about it, and they threatened to close down all Jimmy's business in China. So Jimmy, for being who he is, he sold his fashion chain at I don't know how much, but he sold it, and then he decided he would focus himself on just one thing, the business of defending Hong Kong's freedom. So he started a newspaper company called Apple Daily in 1995. For a very, very long time, when we Hong Kong people talked about Apple, it was the newspaper, not the phone company. So just, you know, how successful it was. And in 2004, myself and two other friends started the Lion Rock Institute. We thought, hey, we might get some help from Jimmy. So I wrote him an email, and Jimmy replied immediately, like in a few minutes he replied, and he said, come to my office tomorrow. So I went. We talked about the Lion Rock Institute. And I remember he told me, he said, look, Simon, if you want to defend freedom, you have to be able to stand on your own. Come work with me, learn how to do business. So I joined his company. In the past 17 years, he's not only my boss, he is also my mentor, someone I look up to for ideas, wisdom, and sometimes a smack in the head. 2019, June 30th, that was the day before Chinese imposed the sedition legislation to Hong Kong. I had my worst writer's block in my career. I stared at my computer for 5 hours. There was only one line. I said, in Hong Kong, no one should sacrifice anything. I didn't know how to continue, so I text my editor, say, hey, today I'm not going to send anything, sorry. And then I text Jimmy, and he replied, you should go. Jimmy knew very well Hong Kong was not safe. He knew it well. He could have left, but he stayed. He chose to be there. He told me Hong Kong gave him everything, so it is time for him to give Hong Kong something. A few weeks after I left Hong Kong, police ransacked Apple Daily. They arrested Jimmy, took away the computers at the company. They arrested a few other newspaper management, but our reporters insisted on printing the newspaper, so we continued to print. And then the police came again, another raid, and they froze the bank accounts of the company. We still keep printing because we still have the paper. We still keep posting on the internet, and then they arrested a few more. After 10 months of harassment and intimidation, unfortunately, Apple Daily ceased operating in Hong Kong in June this year. Having said that, I must say our people in Hong Kong still insist on fighting for freedom. We stopped updating the apps on the Apple App Store, but a lot of people still keep that app in their phone, hoping one day it will come back. This morning, Jimmy defended himself in court. It was over a charge of illegal assembly last year on June 4th. And here is what he said in the court in defense, and let me share. I lit a candle in front of reporters to remind the world of those young men and women who, 31 years ago in Tiananmen Square, put truth, justice, and goodness about their lives. If commemorating those who die because of injustice is a crime, then let me suffer the punishment, so I may share the burden and glory of those young men and women who shed blood on June 4th. Lord, remember those who shed blood, but do not remember the cruelty. Remember the fruit those young men and women have borne because of what they did, and grant, Lord, the fruit they have borne be their redemption. May the power of love of the weak prevails over the power of destruction of the strong. So that's what Jimmy said in the court. And I know people in Hong Kong still keep on fighting, and although it is going to be a tough fight, but I still remember what Jimmy said. We have to be able to stand on our own. And the most important thing is, it all started with a small piece of chocolate from some random strangers. And I think once people tasted the freedom, the sweetness of which, they cannot forget it, and they will fight to the very last moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for those touching words about our friend Jimmy and the lessons we can learn. Our next speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce. She founded her most recent company, Skin is Skin, the lip balm with a mission, in her original home country of Senegal. She's also the director of Atlas Network's Center for African Prosperity. Welcome, Magat Wade.
A bit more love than that. So, I wanted to share with you today a couple of stories, because I do know that most of you probably are feeling quite beaten up most of the time, especially if you're following US news. So I'm here to kind of pump you up a little bit and let you know that things are not as bad as they feel, and that we still have ways for our ideas. So I'm going to start with the first story. Two things. I've been battling on two fronts mostly this past year. One of them has to be about this most dogmatic issue of our time that the climate change issue has become. So I happen to speak to a lot of business groups in the US and internationally. And unfortunately, as you might know, recently a group of 450 of the most powerful the most powerful corporations, along with some NGOs, as well as the EU and the American government, have decided that, you know what, we have this great idea that to save the world, we're going to have to force the halting of fossil fuels by 2030. They all think it's a great idea. They all think, great savers of the world. Earth is going to hell in 12 years. We got to stop everything. And I'm standing over there, usually the only one from Africa around the table, these boardrooms of such, and saying, wait a second, guys. Do you know what that might mean to 1.3 billion people that live on my continent? Where 700 million people live in homes using cooking food using biomass. We're talking about charcoal as well as wood. Do you have any idea what your great idea is about to do to them? We're talking about 1 to 2 million women, especially, dying every single year. Why? Because their lungs are getting burnt, cooked by these fumes. So indoor air pollution, whenever they want to tell us climate change is killing so many people, follow the data. The data coming from the people who say that to you, if you follow the data, you will see that actually half of those deaths are from indoor pollution, because of what I just talked about. When you're faced with something like that, with such facts, do you really think that any decent human being can just sit there and be like, oh, a great idea is still a great idea? What you just did right there is force them to reconsider. And they do reconsider. So anytime I had to lead these battles, eventually this side of the argument won. And it does win, because at the end of the day, most of us are decent human beings. Yes, are 1% of us psychopaths? Absolutely, you get it. But the 99% of the rest of us are just decent human beings trying to make it up as we're going, bumbling along as we're making it, as we're going. So this is a place where I have found that we actually can keep gaining, momentum and terrain. It's not that we don't care about the climate change. I certainly care about Earth. I care about the environment. I am known for that, right? But on Earth, we also have these people. So you cannot tell me, especially if you're telling me that you care about Black lives, that Black lives matter, well, how about the fact that you're about to mess up the place where 90% of a representative of a Black race lives, namely Africa? Don't we have a problem there? So you see how it's always turning it upside down on itself. And so this led me to having my op-ed being published in the Wall Street Journal. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to see it. It's called the COP26 Plan to Keep Africa Poor. And from there, Jordan Peterson retweeted it to all of his followers. So I am saying this because this is a winnable part of the argument. And what I have found with this is, instead of us just sitting there and arguing with one another, you climate alarmist, you climate denier, and pointing fingers at each other, it's about, hey, can we go back to people? Can we go back to thinking about people? And can we do it in an inclusive way? Because just like the yellow vest, the yellow vest in France, I'm sure all of you have heard of it. It started because they raised, the price of oil, and people said, you're talking to me about the end of the planet. I'm talking about the end of a month. So yeah, you talk to me about ending fossil fuels because otherwise Earth is going to explode, but then I'm telling you, let's say I even agree with you that in 12 years it's all over, which I don't agree with, but let's say I agree with you. Then what do? Do we sacrifice 1.3 billion Africans, and I'm not even counting the other people in the rest of the developing world? We just sacrifice them on that altar? It's a very hard proposition to stand by. No one decent will stand by that proposition. So what does it do again? It will make you rethink. And as people rethink, then we start looking at evidence. Then we're more willing to listen and to hear from other sides because we're trying to solve a solution. So I leave you with that one because I know many people in this room feel that that argument is cooked because it has become a religion. I'm telling you, there's an Achilles heel to all of this. That's the way to go. Second, I have been working with market advocates of Africa, in Africa and the African governments there. And because so many people are very interested in what is it going to take to bring prosperity on this continent. And I talk about Africa because it's my continent, my beloved continent. And one thing I discovered as I went, especially this year, is that so many people have no understanding of the distinction between civil law and common law, and the fact that common law is so much better for business. And so, just recently, I was talking with the right hand of one of the African governments. I can't say the country. And after we finished, he said, "My God, I had no idea. I've never heard because this is from." Old French colony, so they all follow French civil law primarily because the French didn't give us any choice, unlike the Anglo-Saxon colonies. And he's like, I never heard of it. But this, to me, is a great hope. You see, nothing scares me more than when there is a problem and no one seems to know what the problem is, what the issue is of a diagnosis. But once people hear the diagnosis, a bulb goes on, and then we can work from there. So this is also another really bright spot. So what we're doing now is working actually with this government to create what we're going to call zones, common law zones. And it's a fascinating process. So you see, in the end, I want to add one more thing. For those of you who have been following, Nigeria just birthed 3 unicorns in the past 6 months. I don't know if you guys have been following. All over the continent, entrepreneurs are moving around doing great stuff. And they're doing it under the worst of circumstances. They don't benefit from the economic freedom that the US has or other rich countries have. Yet, this is a type of successes we're hearing about. Imagine what would happen on this place if they had access to greater economic freedom, better law, primarily the common law, right? Some of them have it, some of them don't. And also if they had expanded access to affordable and reliable energy. Just imagine what would happen on that place when they're already doing what they're doing under some of the worst circumstances. This, my friends, is the great hope out there, the delta that can be achieved in terms of results. And so this is why the work of Atlas Network is so important as far as I'm concerned. And it's never been more important than today. And it is why today I'm here also. I was excited to be here because this is my moment of thank you. Thank you to everyone in this room who has been supporting Atlas, from the staff, the donors, the friends of Atlas, the partners, everyone. This is really a shout from my heart of big, big thank you. These ideas matter. They're making a difference every single day in people's lives, real people's lives, and these ideas might just be what's going to make the difference between me being a respected person as a black person on this earth or not being a respected human being. These ideas are powerful. They're unfortunately not always the most popular, but they do matter. You matter to me, and I just wanted to thank you, and please keep going, because so much depends on this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Magat. Next up, we have one of the Liberty Movement's most recognized personalities and thought leaders. I've been rereading the book that he wrote 10 years ago with Matt Welch, Declaration of Independence. He is the editor and editor-at-large for Reason Magazine, the one and only Nick Gillespie.
Hi, thank you. I am going to try to work a PowerPoint presentation, which, anyone? All right, I guess, folks? It's a good thing it's not a moon launch. What's that? Okay, here we go, thanks. So, Brad had asked me to talk a little bit about the book that my Reason colleague Matt Welch and I published about a decade ago, the Declaration of Independence, which promised that libertarian politics were going to fix what's wrong with America. I can report that the government did not take our advice. So, you don't blame us. But so I want to present a kind of quick synopsis of a kind of new and improved Declaration of Independence, and about how individualism and freedom will remake America, or can remake America. And I agree completely with Brad and with the other speakers that as dire as things are right now, we have a phenomenal opportunity, a set of opportunities, and I would argue, at least in America, I think they're already starting to come about. The two main points of the Declaration of Independence were that a decisive chunk, a large and growing percentage of Americans at that point, were declaring themselves as politically independent and sick of the major parties. In the US, and all of the Americans here know, if you want to vote for somebody who's on a ballot and is going to get into office, it means you got to go with a Democrat or a Republican. But these were like cable packages, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later down the road, but where you have to, for the 2 or 3 channels you really want, you got to put up with a lot of junk that you don't care about. For instance, if you want lower taxes in America, that means that you also have to now be anti-immigrant and you have to be anti-abortion. And these things are not necessarily, they don't make sense together necessarily, but that's the offer. And then, the Democrats have another bundle of options, and to get that ESPN or that HBO or that Comedy Central that you want, you got to put up with a lot of, kind of like Golden Girls reruns or something like that. You can't get out of it. The other thing, the other main point, and this is really important because this is where we need to focus, I think, our attention and a lot of our efforts in America, is that politics is a lagging indicator of where America is already going. And so in the 70s, even as the economic policy was terrible, there was a burst of individualism and entrepreneurship that would later come online in a big way in the 80s, 90s, and aughts that wasn't being taken seriously. But you saw it in the music, you saw it in the dress, you saw it in sexual liberation, and you saw it in entrepreneurship in small businesses like Microsoft and Apple that would later redefine what it meant to be an American corporation. And this is good because these two clips running side by side kind of sum up where we are in America. We are run by two 1,000-year-old men, or the two parties are personified by 1,000-year-old men whose greatest accomplishments in any given day is either walking up a staircase or not falling while walking down a slight incline. Okay, choose your fighter, right? But not to sugarcoat anything, where we are, we're in an era of out-of-control spending. In 2019, before COVID, we set a record in America. The federal government spent $4.4 trillion, most ever. In last year, in fiscal 2021, which wrapped up earlier this fall, the government spent $6.8 trillion. Before that, in 2020, it was $6.6 trillion. Out of control spending. Populism is everywhere. There's a left-wing and a right-wing version of it. They're both bad because they're anti-individualist. They are anti-free markets, ultimately, and they try to centralize power in the name of giving it to all of the people who are shut out of some kind of elite system. Identity politics is everywhere in America, and what we have to understand is we're at a moment in America where there are more ways of being than ever, and yet we're being told you can fit into one of 3 or 4 categories of identity, and then we're going to try and force you to do this or that. It's a way of marshaling people and kind of pushing them into political boxes so they have fewer and fewer options. Cancel culture is everywhere. It's an enemy of free speech. It's an enemy of tolerance. It's an enemy of the innovation and the experimentation that any open society needs in order to go forward. And then we're in what I call a COVID state of exception. There's an Italian philosopher who's worth reading on this concept of the state of exception. Giorgio Agamben says that liberal democracies are particularly prone to declaring states of exception that in order to save a liberal political order where you have individualism, free markets, freedom, you have to suspend it because of some massive threat. He talked about this first mostly in terms of the global war on terror. After 9/11 happened, in order to save the free world, we had to become less free. That's the only way I could make it. It's a weird paradox. George Bush, during the financial crisis, said, I needed to sacrifice free market principles in order to preserve the free market. That's a state of exception. Just as the war on terror and the financial crisis states of exception were running out of juice, we got COVID. And now, in order to be a free people, we need to put up with more and more incursions on our very basic liberties. This is a picture of high school seniors in Washington State who finally got back to go to their schools and their band members. And what are we doing to our children when we are, putting them in bubbles like this? But where we're headed, and this is where I'm excited, and these are just cultural indications of a kind of move towards to a new Declaration of Independence. We're cord cutting. Cable package, households with cable peaked at over 90% about 10, 15 years ago. More and more people are getting rid of that because they don't like those types of packages any more than they like the political packages that the Republicans and Democrats are giving. We're moving into an era of personalized medicine where your own genome will guide diagnostics, therapeutics, health and wellness, diet, and things like that. This is a market globally that is about, it's like around 200 billion now. It's going to be over 700 billion in a decade. And then I want to talk a little bit about NFTs or Bitcoin and blockchain, which is really exciting. This is a massively decentralizing technology, and the representative art form of the Bitcoin, of the blockchain revolution, of the crypto revolution are NFTs. What they do, the typical thing, this is a series called CryptoPunks. Most NFT series, the most popular ones, are long series of endlessly iterated individual differences. This is where the culture is going. We don't want to be black and white. We don't want to be straight and queer. We don't want to be an immigrant or a native. We want to be endlessly mixing and iterating ourselves. The culture is there, and politics needs to catch up. And it's starting to. Identification, party identification is way down. Independents are up. Americans' preference for political activity or for government activity, last year for the first time ever, it peaked at 54%, saying people wanted the government to do more. Now people are going back to wanting it to do less because they've seen what government doing more looks like. Which leads me to our narrative going forward. I think in America, and this can be adapted for other countries, Brad Lipps in his book talked about how the crisis of values in American life today can only be solved by rebuilding a consensus around the institutions of liberalism and free society, by renewing the culture of tolerance and personal responsibility. That is the way forward, and the policies that follow up on that are things like battling for free individual expression, not just in speech, but also in personal, economic, and cultural lifestyles, which are everywhere breaking out all over the place, pushing back against identity politics and whatnot. And then our policies, we need to constantly be devolving decision-making to the individual. And that includes things like school choice, where you get to figure out where you go or what your kids want. It's also in things of taking welfare payments and turning them into unrestricted cash transfers so people can choose to spend money the way they need to improve themselves. And then finally, with COVID, now with vaccines, we can devolve the risk assessment to the individual. I am safe from COVID because I'm vaccinated. I'll go out in the world as I see fit. These are kind of some of the winning strategies coming off of that winning idea that Brad talks about that are right for this time. So I'll look forward to talking more about this in the comments, but thank you very much.
All right, next up we have an amazing Argentine that I'm proud to call a colleague at Atlas Network as part of our Center for Latin America. She's an author, cable news personality, and social media powerhouse, Antonella Martí.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you. Buen día. Good morning. Okay, so let me tell you a very brief story about my country of birth, Argentina. Argentina has a population of 45 million people. 20 million people in my country receive money from the government. That's almost half of the country, almost half of the population. And only 7 million people in Argentina work in the private sector. So, if you wonder why Argentina is broken, why Latin America is doing so bad, well, there is the answer. We have a big nanny state. And that, my friends, that is populism. And you know how it is. We know how it is. The populist leader will cut your legs, will give you crutches, and to top it all, will tell you that if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't be able to walk. And I always say that if subsidies were the solution to poverty, then Argentina, Cuba, and Venezuela should be the richest countries in the world. But of course, they are not. So the question we should be asking ourselves right now is not what causes poverty. The question we should be asking ourselves is what causes prosperity? What causes progress? And we know the best way to end poverty is creating wealth. Not taxing wealth, not distributing wealth with that fake concept, an immoral concept of social justice. The best way to create wealth is through commerce, with more businesses, with more innovation. And that's why we need to understand wealth. Wealth is not a zero-sum game. It is a big lie that the poor is poor because the rich is rich. That is just like saying that the sick is sick because the healthy is healthy. Or saying that Toyota is slow because Ferrari is fast. Make no sense, right? So this is why we need to celebrate the entrepreneurs. We need to celebrate the creators. We need to celebrate the innovators. In Latin America, we demonize the entrepreneurs. In Latin America, we demonize wealth creation. but we need to stop punishing success. Taxes became a fine for doing good. And that's why we need a small government, we need more entrepreneurs, and of course, less bureaucrats. But now let's think about Homo sapiens evolution, or the history of humankind. Human species lived 99% of its existence in extreme poverty. But everything changed with what Deidre McCloskey calls the Great Enrichment, with the Industrial Revolution, with trade, with rule of law, with civil liberties, with immigration, and, of course, free people. So everything changed 200 years ago. 200 years ago, 95% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Yes, you heard that correctly. 95%. That's basically the entire planet. Now the number is 9%. So we went from 95% to 9% only in 200 years. For example, in the last, 30 years, more than 1 billion people came out of poverty thanks to globalization and free markets. So it's all about facts. So far, this is the best time to be alive. Life is better and longer in free and open societies. We know that. The poor in the freest economies make 10 times more money than the poor in socialist economies. It's all about facts. Socialism killed more than 150 million people. They even built a wall in Berlin so people couldn't escape that system. And people keep trying socialism. We try socialism over and over and over in Latin America, everywhere. It just doesn't work. See Venezuela, see Cuba, Nicaragua, Latin America. The problem is not the chef. The problem is the recipe. And an important feature to identify a socialist is hypocrisy, because they don't live according to the way they say they think. And they even, and this happens a lot in Latin America, they even save their money in dollars. Never in Cuban pesos, never in Argentine pesos, never in bolivars. No. But now let's talk a little bit about liberalism. Liberalism is not only about numbers. It's not only about economics. It's not only about economic freedom or political freedom. Liberalism is also about individual liberties. And individual liberties rest on 3 fundamental pillars: equality before the law, the non-aggression principle, and the concept that my rights don't end where your feelings or your own morality begins. So we need to understand that we cannot divide liberty. Liberalism is a total defense of liberty. And liberty is opposed to all kinds of collectivisms, dictatorships, nationalisms, and populisms from the left and from the right, without exceptions. And like Deidre McCloskey says, liberalism is adultism. It is being an adult. It is treat others as adults and expect others to treat us as adults, including the government, of course. So it's very simple. Your life belongs to you and just you, and you don't own people. You cannot decide what others do with their bodies or with their lives. And I need to quote the Kiwis motto because I just love it. They say, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. But what does it mean? It means liberty is about respect and human dignity. So remember, you are the only owner of your life. You are the hero of your story. And liberty is not something that someone else has to give you. Liberty is something that nobody should take away from you. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Anto. Finally, last but not least, we have a longtime friend of Atlas Network who served for many years as the vice president of the Civil Development Forum, founded by Professor Leszek Balcerowicz in Poland. This year, he's taken on a new role as the CEO of the new Economic Freedom Foundation of Poland. Marek Tatala, sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's great to be in Miami with you, among many old and new friends, and it's great also to speak to real people without having to unmute myself on Zoom. On my way to Florida, I finished Brad Lipp's inspiring book, Liberalism and the Free Society, in 2021. The rule of law is a theme that Brad discusses in several of his chapters, and I co-authored a series of English language reports on Poland's rule of law crisis, in which the ruling party has been assaulting the judiciary's independence, utilizing prosecution to achieve political ends, and breaking numerous legislative procedures. Poland's rank in major international indices such as World Justice Project, Freedom House, and Fraser Institute has deteriorated. Many organizations in Poland, including mine, work to preserve the rule of law while simultaneously considering how to restore checks and balances and implement meaningful justice system reforms. This topic is important not only for prosperity, but also for attracting new supporters to the freedom movement. Some individuals assume that classical liberalism means that there is no rule of law, predatory capitalism without any rules, they say. To draw more people to our cause, it is critical to demonstrate that many of us support a free market system within the framework of liberal democracy and the rule of law. I will be leading Civil Development Forum, a leading Polish think tank founded by Professor Leszek Balcerowicz in the new future. I started as an intern in 2010, and thanks also to help of many Atlas Network training programs, I was able to climb all the way to the position of vice president. In Civil Development Forum, we publish a lot of research papers and policy recommendations. However, we also recognize the significance of effective communication of ideas. It can be much more targeted and affordable to NGOs thanks to social media and new modern technologies. According to the opinion poll published in Poland earlier this year, support for the privatization of state-owned companies has increased dramatically, as has support for lower taxes and flat income tax. It might be interpreted as a reaction to abuses of power, government failures, and the misappropriation of public funds for political or propagandist goals. It's a fantastic opportunity for liberals, but we need to focus more resources on persuading that freedom is the best response to illiberal populist regimes. This forum is undoubtedly a place where we can improve our ability to communicate our many great ideas. I've read in Brad's book that in the US, a lot of people under 40 don't know what socialism is. And despite the relatively optimistic results of the poll I just stated, we can see similar trends in Poland, a country that has endured over 40 years of socialism. It is why we initiated the Virtual Museum of 1989, which tells the story of Poland's successful transition from socialism to free market capitalism in an engaging and creative way. Our guests can access the history of the end of socialism by immersing themselves in historical spaces reconstructed in 3D. And the project is primarily targeted at students, and it blends a cutting-edge mode of communication with a thorough historical narrative. Even if someone is drawn to the ideas offered in this virtual museum, she can still argue that it is not true socialism, because true socialism can be found in Sweden or in other Scandinavian countries. So we need to educate people about the origins of wealth in Scandinavia, which are embedded in many liberal solutions. When I personally speak to media, and I emphasize one key point: all Nordic countries rank higher than Poland in economic freedom and doing business indices. So if so many people like Scandinavian model, they must understand that for countries like Poland and many other represented in this room, it means not only more social spending, which may have different consequences outside of Scandinavia, but also more economic freedom, better protection of private property, stronger private sector, deregulation, and the rule of law. Another way to persuade young people to embrace liberalism is to underline that it is not incompatible with openness and tolerance. Despite the present government's strong anti-migrant rhetoric, Poland has had the biggest inflow of migrants in its modern history in recent years. Hundreds of years ago, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a safe haven for religious and ethnic minorities in comparison to the rest of Europe. The Museum of History of Polish Jews in Warsaw is called Polin, which means "here you will rest" in Hebrew. Nowadays, Poland attracts many people from Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of Eastern Europe and Asia. And classical liberals should underline the values of openness, which has brought enormous economic gains for Poland and many other countries. Not so many people are also aware of huge intolerance and of socialist regimes and thinkers. In his speech in Warsaw last week, Tom Palmer gave some examples of anti-Semitism in Karl Marx's work. There are still people who worship Che Guevara without knowing how intolerant and violent he was. The Polish movie Operation Hyacinth is now available on Netflix. It is based on a true story about the secret communist police operation to compile a national database of Polish homosexuals for the purpose of blackmailing and recruiting collaborators. Let us demonstrate to young generations that tolerance and openness can be found in classical liberalism rather than socialism. According to the research discussed in Brad's book, 86% of think tank members express very high or high satisfaction from their work in the freedom movement, and I belong to this group. So despite my departure from the Civil Development Forum, I will remain active in the movement and have already begun work as the CEO of the newly founded Economic Freedom Foundation. This new nonprofit, founded by Polish entrepreneur Arkadiusz Muś, who wants to use his business successes to boost support for classical liberal causes. So in 2020, we intend to invest more than $500,000 in grants to other NGOs, think tanks, and organizations in Poland that are working on liberal projects. And of course, Atlas Network work in giving grants to organizations is great inspiration for us. Many people in my country are willing to work to undo the bad transition, illiberal tendencies, rule of law violations, renationalizations, growing status, and rejection of many achievements of 1989 transition, and Economic Freedom Foundation wants to support them. Poland is ranked 9th in the Global Index of Economic Mentality, which assesses how much people value individual liberty, competition, and responsibility over government intervention and redistribution. And it gives me hope, and there is a lot of room for improvement in terms of free market policies, so we can move up from 75th place in the Fraser Institute's ranking of economic freedom. The Atlas Network and many Atlas partners can be a great source of inspiration for our work, so I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming panels, discussions, networking, and learning opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek Tatala, and welcome back to everyone here. How great is it that we can turn to friends of Atlas Network to get us started off with some, I think, really thought-provoking talks. I sort of wanted to start our conversation. We've got about 27 minutes, and again, you can send questions in if you want me to try to incorporate what you've been thinking about into this conversation. But I thought we'd start kind of where Marek left off, talking about the way that people in general are seeing economic questions, but in particularly the youth. One of the troubling findings of the research that I was doing was that in the US, there's a very large gap between the economic mentality or the favorability towards free market ideas among older generations, which are still rather free market here in the US, and then the youth. If you looked at only Americans under 40, the US has sort of the same disposition towards free markets as you see in Ethiopia and Colombia and Vietnam. So it's I think, an interesting thing for us to wrestle with, and I'd be interested in what, Nick, you found with your Reason Foundation colleagues about how to more effectively communicate our message. It doesn't seem to be working that well.
Yeah, it's really tough, but there's also, I think it's important to recognize that polls and surveys get one kind of data, but then when you look at reality, the fact is that we did a poll of millennials back in 2015, a national poll.
Do we need hand mic? Okay, thanks. Sorry, Nick.
Sorry. You know, they don't want my message to get out. So no. But
conspiracy.
You know, at Reason in 2015, we did a national poll of what were then millennials, but it was basically people under 30. And we found that a lot of them were very favorably disposed towards the word socialism. The good news was they couldn't define it. And the even better news was that they were also very interested in entrepreneurship, and they did not see profit as necessarily a bad thing. So some of this is terminology. There's no question that ideologically there are a lot of extreme people out there and a lot of young people out there. And something weird is going on with young people in America, and I can report this as an old person. So I follow this extremely closely, and I have 2 kids under 30. But one of the most disturbing things that I saw was a recent poll from the Center for American Progress that said millennials and Gen Z reported higher levels of being kept from going about their daily tasks because of physical problems than baby boomers. Something weird is definitely going on. But how do we get to people? One is that we need to be idealistic, I think, and we also need to be realists. I think everybody up here marshaled a huge amount of facts of what is reality like and what helps poor people, what helps people actualizing and live the lives they want. And I think we have a winning story with that. I think the other thing to think about is, Friedrich Hayek said every generation has to remake not the ideals of kind of freedom, but how you talk about it. And I think it's useful to talk about things in terms of empathy and autonomy. Because, and Brad, even in your opening comments, you were talking about inclusivity. Being able to show that you understand where people are and what they're going through is really important, and I think a lot of the times in the free market community, we've scanted that in favor of the brutal efficiency of market processes. That doesn't really work, especially with younger people. And then stressing autonomy. You are in charge of your life. You're responsible for your life no matter what, and I think showing people more empathy and delivering more autonomy to them is a way to capture young people who are not in lockstep progressive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and one of the things that was interesting in having conversations with African colleagues, I'll ask Magat to comment on this, is the access to technology that this generation of young people have is obviously completely different from what prior generations had. And my impression is that there's also more awareness of how other people are living, more envy of free societies when they get exposed to it, and more anger at corruption that used to be tolerated. Is that a trend that you see, Magat, or that we can capitalize on?
It depends on how you look at it. I'm definitely seeing that, for sure. But I still feel that the misunderstandings are still there because when let's take a look. I have in Senegal, where I'm from, some kids asking me, my God, do some people really live like the Kardashians? And I'm like, yes, they're real and they do exist. It's just so outrageous, the discrepancy. But then, so what you have is 2 camps. One that definitely wants to go for that, and it doesn't matter who they're going to have to kill on their way to that type of prosperity. And then you have others who are just like, see, that's our sign that some people are, some are taking from others. So yes, technology is there, but I'm not sure, and it is educating more and more people. Our folks are having access to other things that they didn't have access to before this media being accessible to everybody. But I'm afraid, what worries me more is, what do you call it? The bubbles. How do we say that in America? The bubbles? Yeah, the bubbles that they live in. And so I'm not sure what I would answer to that. But I wanted to go back to something that Nick said. What I have found talking with young people is I usually try to stay away from terms that we all think each of us knows the definition we're giving to the term, when I know that maybe we don't have the same definition to the term. I'm even going to refrain from saying mine is right, theirs is wrong. I just know we don't have it. So I usually never use words like capitalism and any of those words, or even when somebody is talking about the wealth gap, I'm pretty good at saying, what do you mean by wealth gap? And they're like, well, wealth gap. No, what do you mean by wealth gap? And, well, I'll have to get back to you. Okay, get back to me. So I think it's very important that we ask people, to really always define. Whenever I hear one of those words that's like a little trigger word, make sure that you ask them what do they mean by that. Somebody's talking about privilege. What do you mean? And then something that Michael taught me very well to do is then to reply back, be saying, and what does you acknowledging whatever privilege you have, whether it's being white or man or whatever, then how does it solve a problem of the other person? Yeah, okay. So for me, there's also that. We should not be so shy. I think that one thing I'm seeing in America and everywhere else is it's almost like we're putting this youth on this pedestal and we have to win them at all costs and we need to be so nice and so soft. No, they want to be taken as adults. Treat them as adults. I respect you. I'm going to treat it as an adult. So I think we need to start coveting them, even our side, because we're trying too much. Nick, please, I'm so cool, I'm so nice, please be my friend. No, you want to talk business, let's talk business. So that's my approach.
Okay. I was thinking that one of the interesting things I remember hearing at our Europe Liberty Forum last summer, which we held virtually, was Johan Norberg making the point that we've sort of been living in the Greta Thunberg world of no travel and no trade and essentially shutting down many of the things that modernity has brought us, and that this is probably a good teaching moment because we've tried that, and it's kind of unpleasant. And I'm wondering, Marek, maybe you can comment about in Europe how that's playing out, if there's any rethinking of some of those priorities.
I agree that what happened during COVID-19 was a great, real-life example for many people what restrictions to freedom to travel, for example, mean after, living in so many years in the European Union and the Schengen zone, when we can travel freely cross borders without showing passport. I was even, a bit surprised when I was crossing Polish-Ukrainian borders last month how much time it takes and how much questions they ask about, goods you carry, or alcohol, cigarettes, food. But I also think that during COVID-19, there were a lot of opportunities for governments to present themselves, how successful they were, like they did kind of propaganda when they were bringing, planes full of masks from China to Europe. But there were hundreds of individual and free market type successes. A lot of entrepreneurs switching from production of alcohol to hand sanitizer. A lot of people in Poland started doing masks in their home to sell later to people. And I think the problem is that we heard a lot in the media about this big success story of governments when they were bringing this stuff in huge amounts, but there are thousands of these examples around the world that are not visible enough, and I think it will be also a good lesson how successful free market was also during COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like the big lesson that I've learned is just that resilience really does come from the bottom up and is rarely imposed effectively from the top down, and it should be a great teaching opportunity for us. When I think about COVID propaganda, it's tough not to turn to China, and I'd love to hear some of Simon's thoughts. You spoke at Mont Pelerin Society recently about the way that the protest movements in Hong Kong existed and operated among all the restrictions that were being imposed pre-COVID. I'm wondering how ideas are still being circulated and whether you see any hope as we sit here in 2021.
People are actually getting a clearer picture about China. In the past maybe 20 or so years, I think a lot of people have the illusion that, as China progresses economically, it might open up and becomes more converged to the norms in the other parts of the world. But what happened was, if you look at what the Chinese government did, not only to Hong Kong, but also to Macau, to its own thriving startup economy, you see Chinese government is trying to define a new paradigm. If they just have this new declaration very recently, they say there are 3 stages in Chinese history, the contemporary China. During Mao period, it was really about defending China against this imperialists. And during Deng's period, that is from 1978 till 2018, China became a middle-class nation, wealthy enough, and now China is entering into a new stage. There's a very sharp cut in 2018. And if you look at what happened after 2018, the way Chinese government conduct their diplomacy, the way they do things, the way they talk, and even the way they deal with the international financial order and everything is just different. So Hong Kong is just part of that story. And I think more and more people are getting to realize this is a wake-up call. It is really an ideological thing, and my speculation is because China is so fragile. It knows it is vulnerable, therefore it overreacts in a way that they try to assert itself all over the world. So that's my take.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good time to bring in Anto, because I think that the Cuba story is going to be one we discuss over these next 2 days, but it seems like another interesting example of more fragility, maybe than people suspected, behind an authoritarian regime.
Well, Cuba is one of the biggest problems that we have in Latin America, and I think, and I always say that Cuba is the head of the monster, and Venezuela is its blood, right? Because Venezuela oxygenates Cuba. So you cannot understand Cuba if you don't understand Venezuela, and you don't understand Venezuela if you don't understand Cuba. So they have a very, very important and profound relation. So everything started with, in 1959, when the Castros arrived and took power in Cuba. They implemented this, one of the bloodiest regimes in the world history. And there was Che Guevara. You see many people wearing the Che Guevara shirt, and they don't know that he was a murderer. And many people, we should know that, and we should say that he was openly a murderer. He killed people. Che Guevara, he sent a letter to his father saying that he enjoyed killing people. So we need to get rid of those myths. But the thing is that Cuba has been there for more than 63 years, more than half a century. So until the 90s, Cuba lived from the Soviet subsidies. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, Fidel Castro, he understood that he needed someone else, because that's what communist regimes, that's what they do. They need to live from someone else. So Fidel Castro founded the Foro de Sao Paulo, the Sao Paulo Forum, which is a movement of political parties from the left that they want to defeat imperialism and neoliberalism, and all those things, how they call it. So after that, that's when Hugo Chavez appeared in Venezuela. And Venezuela became the oxygen of Cuba. So we have that wave of socialist and populist regimes in this 21st century. And this is a very, very complicated thing, because we see many people that they still defend and they still promote Cuba. I talk to many people in Argentina, for example, when I go to TV debates, and they are like, oh no, but socialism works. Socialism works in Cuba. And I'm like, go to Cuba. I went to Cuba. I've been there six years ago. I cannot go back to Cuba because the regime released a letter saying that I violated the travel visa and that I was a CIA agent and all the things that they say. But when you see communism, when you experience communism, I went to visit the Ladies in White. This is a group of women that promote and defend liberty, and they are brutally repressed in the island. And I went to their house, and when I was there, they told me, Antonella, so everything we're talking right now, the regime knows it because the house is full of microphones, and when you leave the house, just, look down and just walk as fast as you can. And when you feel that, when you experience that, that is so hard. And it happened something very similar in Venezuela. In Venezuela, last time I went was like 2 or 3 years ago. And I went to the last radio station it no longer exists, but there was this radio station, and they told me, Antonella, please don't mention this, don't say that name, don't say this. And when you have to self-censor yourself, that is also one of the most complicated things that you can experience, right?
Well, one thing I'm looking forward to is tomorrow night we have Yotuel, whose song has obviously been an amazing transformative thing for the Cuba liberation movement. We had a question about whether there are celebrities who are now feeling themselves self-censoring who may be the kind of people that could become allies, and Reason, I think, has been on the forefront of engaging popular culture. I'm thinking now about free speech debates we have here in the US, Nick. Do you see more of that coming? Or?
Well, I certainly see more debates. Celebrities are a mixed bag because, they can be powerful megaphones for messages, but they're their own people, and they're often not that well versed in the topics. And I think it's really always much better to focus on the true ground up, bottom up kind of messaging, as well as social movements and things like that. And that's what's interesting. Matt Damon is now doing ads for Crypto.com. So is he in favor of this radically decentralized alternative store of value and banking system? He also was in a movie that was funded partly by the Chinese government and changed its plot in order to hopefully gain a Chinese audience. You're always going to have that kind of thing. And I think the important thing is that we are talking to people who are actually living and working, breathing, making businesses, doing policy and things like that. And if we're talking about younger people, they have lived through 2 years now, oftentimes in individualized plastic bubbles with saxophones in them. If that picture was true that I showed, they have had an object lesson. They've had a lifetime of how poorly and arbitrarily government often acts, and elites and people with knowledge and power. We can talk to them about the different ways that things can go, and I think that's the main way to go, more than trying to get Matt Damon now to say, getting rid of the capital gains tax, that would be great.
Yeah, so here's an interesting question that comes from the audience. Do the speakers agree that our movement may be suffering from being too rational? We put our arguments logically and calmly, but is the 21st century now characterized by appeals to the heart and not the head? I'd like to think we should still talk to the head, but how do we bridge the gap?
That's how I got introduced to this movement. I still don't call myself the L word, quite frankly. That's how I got introduced to this world. The first talk I ever gave to the libertarian community was, you guys are too freaking rational for your own good. And stop trying to, whenever the mind tries to argue with the heart, it doesn't matter how right this one guy is. This always ends up winning. It's just a fact of life. That's how we're built. That's why, for me, it always goes back to the stories, and it always goes back to the stories of the underdogs. Period. And in a way, I always tell people, I came to the liberty movement not for liberty's sake. I came to the liberty movement because these ideas are the best way forward, are actually the only chance for the underdogs to also thrive and prosper like everybody else. For me, it's very clear. And so when you go out there and you speak from that place, you automatically earn the moral high ground. And it's also about that, gaining the moral high ground. That's what I shouldn't say the left, that's what other people who don't agree with us have on us, unfortunately. They hold the moral high ground. And so for us, it's so easy to pick it back up. And also, another thing I would say about that is, this is why I love Atlas. Out of so many, of the L communities, it's because when you look also, where are most of the underdogs? And I hate call it that word. What I mean by that is people who are, you know what I mean. We need to find a better word, by the way, for that. But where are they? Primarily in the developing nations right now. And in places like that, our case is so clear. It is so clear. Anyone who would disagree with you puts automatically themselves on the box of you're the a-hole, not us. So use it. Let's pick. So this is what we need to do. But oftentimes I hear us arguing about American problems, and I know it matters. It's important. But what I have found is usually I take the route of talking to the younger people from the standpoint of people in the developing world, from the standpoint of those women who are burning their lungs, from the standpoint of these kids whose parents have no jobs, and we build a bridge. And from that bridge, I bring them back to the US side. That's when they start asking, oh, and do you think the minimum wage is the same issue as what you just described earlier? And then we have conversations. Now it's becoming important to them. So that's all. I'm just going to stop right there, but I've always felt that we need to stop arguing. You're never going to argue your way to somebody's heart. Quit it. It doesn't work.
That's tough to follow, but I think Magat always gets the applause line. But I wonder, one of the things I noticed is that in many societies that deal with populists, I don't think this is something we need to look at from some of this macro, where are the most vulnerable populations, and that's definitely
Vulnerable, that's a good word.
in developing countries. But all over Europe, all over Latin America, I think we see populists feeding on this idea of, that they're there to solve insecurities. And I don't think we've done that very effectively, sometimes because it's a message of envy that resonates most, and I think we all think that's sort of an ugly temptation. But I wonder if there's ways, and maybe you can comment, Antonella or Marek, about policy areas where you're seeing partners actually solve problems for people in low-income situations where maybe in the past we would have left it alone, to, I think, our big error.
Okay, so when it comes to populism in Latin America, and I think maybe in the entire world, because this is a global phenomena, we see many people thinking that you can defeat a left-wing populist with a right-wing populist. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have in Latin America right now, because we go into that pendulum that goes from the left and the right, left and the right. And we don't solve the problems. We don't really solve the problems that we have. And one of the things there is that in Latin America, people, they just fall in love with politicians. They fall in love with these messiahs. And they come and they appear and they will save your life and they will solve your problems and they will do everything for you. And we cannot get rid of that way, see politics or think about politics. And I think, we have a lot of partners that are doing wonderful things in Latin America to stop with that mentality. Se dice libertad in Venezuela. They are doing wonderful things in Venezuela, promoting these ideas in Venezuela is one of the most complicated things that we have. But we can also talk about, Spain, because I also, I try to, when I talk to Latin America, I try to talk about Spain because we share a lot of things. And now we are seeing and facing the same problems. And Spain is facing basically the same problems that we are facing in Latin America with these left-wing and right-wing populists. And we have our friends from Fundación Avance para la Libertad with Juan Pina, Roxana Nicula. They are doing an amazing job. I think this is a huge network with such a great potential. And we need to, make this message popular, not populist, because many people think that you can have sort of a populist libertarianism, but I don't agree. I don't think there is such a thing as a populist or a libertarian populism, because populism, the way they operate and the way they see power is through destruction of institutions. And institutions, that's a fundamental thing in Latin America. And you can see that in Miami. Miami is a city full of immigrants, full of people from Latin America, from everywhere. And when they come here, they achieve great things. Why? Because they have the institutions, because they have rule of law, because you have a lot of things that you don't have and you lack in Latin America. So.
Hey, could I just, just to build on that, and also because since I work at Reason, I do want to throw in a word for rationality and abstracting ourselves out of emotionalism, because I think Magat is absolutely correct that you have to connect with people, and that oftentimes is going to be done through, if not emotional appeals, but through empathy and through talking and understanding where people are and where you're coming from. You don't open, a lecture with a long math equation. You start with an anecdote, you start with a story. But it's very important for us if we want to avoid merely going from a right-wing version of badness to a left-wing version and back. At some point we have to present a true liberal alternative, which is grounded in human activity and human desire and human anxiety, but then it does pull out and it says, look, these are rules. We can look at all of these examples where people go from poverty to prosperity, where they go from tyranny to freedom, and the good things that come. And now let's start talking about what's in common here and pulling, this is where when Hume said that reason is and always will be a slave to the passions. It doesn't mean we use that. We may not open with that, but it's really important, I think, to get to a point where we're talking about institutions and laws and not the whims of, of a person that we happen to believe in the moment.
Yeah. Now, I know that we're running short on time. I would like, since we began with Simon talking about our friend Jimmy Lai and his prison sentence, what do you think Jimmy would recommend to us, how freedom-loving people around the world can remain supportive of the situation in Hong Kong, or what would he want to tell us, do you think?
Well, I think if he has the liberty, he would be very interested about all these new phenomena on the Web3, the blockchain and crypto thing. He would ask me to do stuff there, and I realized there is a counterculture phenomenon going on with these crypto blockchain people. And just think about what happened earlier this year with this meme stock. If you think these people, they are only driven by greed or anger, not really. They do study, they do look at the financial position of these meme stocks and stuff like that. So I think it might be a false dichotomy to put emotion and reason against each other. Sometimes they can go well with each other. They can do something, they can profit from it, but at the same time be very passionate about it. So I think Jimmy would say, let's find some different businesses, do experiment with stuff, start a few DAOs and see how it goes and things like that.
Very good. Well, we've got 2 days
And I think these
ahead.
guys misunderstood me. I'm not saying reason doesn't matter. It darn matters.
Yeah, of course.
But do not lead. But I've found that it is not a good idea to try to lead with reason. And also when the argument goes into, what I call human considerations, reason, once again, I see the argument always trying to go back to reason to be like, well, I'm right. And I'm like, this is the worst time for you to actually use reason. Be with people, connect emotionally, and then have reason be your foundational facts of, be very strong. So that's all I'm saying. You guys misunderstood me. I still stand by what I said.
Okay, just one quick one.
One last thing.
Because in politics, a lot of things are driven by anger. But I think Jimmy would say, let's do something fun. Like the piece of chocolate, sweetness. Like this is quite important thing.
I like that. That's a good place to end because we have 2 days to have fun, to work on our messaging, to launch some experiments. I'm very glad to have this panel kick us off for Liberty Forum. How about a hand for our panelists? And I've got a couple of housekeeping notes. I do need to announce that for our international friends who need negative COVID tests to return home, we're offering tests on site tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the Ponciana Ballroom 4. You can make an appointment or they accept walk-ins. There's also a free testing site just an 8-minute walk away that's open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. More information on all this is advertised in the event app and in the printed program. For the first time ever, we have an Atlas Network virtual reality experience available just outside in the exhibitor hall. So head over for that experience, or you can make an appointment within the mobile app. You can also find in the app or in the program instructions on how you can get a free downloaded copy of my book that people said such nice, generous words for. Thanks, folks. Liberalism and the Free Society in 2021. Our booth has some physical copies for sale, so that should probably be the first thing you do when you exit. We have just a 15-minute break before we start our concurrent sessions. A wonderful session with two of my favorite legal minds in the world, Doug Ginsburg and Clint Bullock. That's called Protecting the Rule of Law. One on what we've learned during the pandemic, and then the first of our regional deep dives. This one is about Africa with a focus on the free trade area as a poverty cure. Thank you for being with us at Liberty Forum.
Thank you.